Listen to me, when I stand here and talk about power, about destiny, about the choices that nations make, I want you to understand something very clear. Nothing in this world is permanent, nothing in this world is guaranteed, and no empire lasts forever. We live in a time where relationships between countries can be destroyed, not by an army, not by a nuclear weapon, but sometimes by the words, the actions, or the decisions of one person. And when that one person is bold enough, stubborn enough, and fearless enough to challenge the most powerful nation in the world, then the entire system begins to shake. That is exactly what happened with U.S. India relations. They were not torn apart by an army or by an invasion, but by one Indian, one individual who was not afraid to expose the truth and take a stand. For decades, the United States and India tried to dance around each other. Sometimes they pretended to be allies, sometimes they acted like rivals, and sometimes they played this game of convenience, using each other for trade, for defense, for influence. But beneath the surface, there was always tension. There was always suspicion, there was always the feeling that one day something would snap, and it did. It didn't snap because of war, it didn't snap because of economics, it snapped because the mask was ripped off. The truth was revealed, and when the truth comes out, no amount of diplomacy can cover it up again. You see, when you challenge the biggest player in the game, you have to be prepared for consequences. And that one Indian, the one who had the courage to say enough, changed the relationship forever, because he was not playing their game, he was not bending his knee, he was not begging for favors, he stood up like a warrior. He stood up like a lion. And when you do that, when you refuse to submit, the empire begins to crumble, not because you destroy it with weapons, but because you destroy it with truth. And let me tell you something about truth. The truth is stronger than bullets, the truth is heavier than tanks, the truth is louder than bombs. Once the truth is out, you cannot unhear it, you cannot unsee it, and you cannot ignore it. That is why the entire relationship between the U.S. and India has changed, because the truth was exposed, the truth about exploitation, the truth about hypocrisy, the truth about how one side was always trying to dominate the other, always trying to keep it down, always trying to remind it who was boss. But no more. The story is simple, but it is powerful. India was rising. It was becoming stronger in technology, in defense, in economy, in global influence. The world was watching. And the United States, a country used to being the number one, started to feel the pressure. They wanted India on their side, but only as a follower, not as an equal. They wanted India to obey, not to lead, and this is where the clash began, because one Indian said, "We will not obey, we will not follow, we will not play second fiddle in our own story." That statement was the earthquake. That statement was the explosion. That statement destroyed the illusion of partnership. And you know what happens when illusions are destroyed. People get angry, people panic, people lash out. The so-called friendship between the two countries was tested, and it failed. The deals collapsed, the trust disappeared, the smiles in front of the cameras meant nothing. Behind closed doors it was fire and fury, behind the handshakes it was betrayal and resentment, behind the promises it was threats and warnings. And once you reach that point, there is no going back. Now, let me tell you something about leadership, because I know about leadership. Leadership is not about pleasing everybody. Leadership is not about keeping the peace when the peace is fake. Leadership is about standing tall when everyone else is kneeling. Leadership is about making the tough choice, even if the world hates you for it. And that one Indian leader did exactly that. He destroyed the comfortable illusion, he broke the fake friendship, and he exposed the real truth. The truth is this: the United States never wanted India as a true partner. They wanted India as a pawn in their global chessboard. They wanted India as a counterweight to China, but not as a competitor to themselves. They wanted India to fight their battles, but not to win its own. And for years, many in India accepted this role because it seemed like the only way forward, but not anymore. Not after one man stood up and said no. And when that happened, the reaction was immediate. You saw the headlines, you heard the speeches, the threats came out. Tariffs, sanctions, warnings, every weapon in the economic arsenal was thrown on the table. The message was clear: if you don't obey, we will punish you. But instead of fear, there was defiance. Instead of surrender, there was strength. And instead of running back into the arms of Washington, India looked to the east, to Russia, to China, to its own people, its own economy, its own strength. This is what the world needs to understand. Power is shifting. The days when one country could control the destiny of all others are over. The world is multipolar now, and the destruction of U.S. India relations by the actions of one Indian is not just a story about two nations. It is a story about the entire global order. It is a signal that the balance of power is changing. The empires of the past cannot control the future. The lions of the future are rising. But don't think this was easy. Don't think this was just a speech, just a signature, just a decision. No, it was a battle of courage, a battle of will, a battle of pride. It takes strength to stand up to a superpower. It takes guts to refuse the easy path. And it takes vision to see that the future belongs not to those who obey, but to those who lead. That is why this Indian's action was not just political, it was historic. It destroyed one relationship, yes, but it built the foundation for something far greater, independence. And let me tell you, this independence is not given. Independence is taken. Independence is seized. Independence is earned with sacrifice, with struggle, with pain. And India, by standing firm, earned its independence again on the global stage, no longer just a colony of history, no longer just a follower of someone else's path, but a nation with its own destiny, its own vision, its own pride. I want you to feel the weight of this moment. This is not about trade deals. This is not about tariffs. This is about respect. Respect is the most powerful currency in the world, more powerful than dollars, more powerful than weapons, more powerful than armies, and respect cannot be demanded. Respect must be earned, and India earned it the day it refused to bow down. When one man stood up, he was not standing up just for himself. He was standing up for a billion people. He was standing up for a culture, a civilization, a history that goes back thousands of years. He was standing up for every child in India who dreams of a future where their nation is not controlled by anyone else. He was standing up for every voice that was ever silenced. He was standing up for every nation that was ever told, "You are too weak, you are too small, you cannot rise." And in that moment he spoke for all of them. The destruction of U.S. India relations is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new one, because sometimes you must destroy in order to build. Sometimes you must break in order to rise. Sometimes you must lose one friend to discover your true strength. That is what happened. One Indian destroyed a relationship, but in doing so, he built something much greater: dignity, sovereignty, power. I know people are afraid of change. I know people think stability is the most important thing. But let me tell you something. Stability is a myth if it is built on weakness. Real stability comes from strength. Real stability comes from independence. Real stability comes when you don't have to rely on anyone else. That is what India is learning now. That is what the world is learning now. That is why the truth cannot be hidden anymore. The truth is that the United States is no longer the unquestioned master of the world. The truth is that India will no longer accept the role of a follower. The truth is that the future will be decided not by threats, but by courage. Not by intimidation, but by vision. Not by domination, but by cooperation among equals. And this shift, this massive shift, began when one man had the courage to destroy what was fake in order to build what is real. So I say this: respect the courage, respect the choice, respect the fire that refuses to be extinguished, because the world is not going back to the old order. The world is moving forward. And whether you like it or not, the lions are awake, the giants are rising, and the future belongs to those who dare to stand tall. That, my friends, is the real truth. Listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to say is not about politics, not about diplomacy, not about the games nations play, but about power, courage, and destiny. There are moments in history when everything changes, not slowly, not gradually, but instantly, like a thunderclap in the sky. One single decision, one moment of defiance, one act of courage can alter the path of nations and even the entire world. That is exactly what happened when India made that choice. A single decision transformed India from being a follower, always standing in someone else's shadow, to becoming a leader standing tall on the world stage. For too long, India was treated as the student in the classroom of global politics, listening quietly while the so-called superpowers lectured. For too long, India was expected to accept what was handed down, to smile for the cameras, to shake the hands that were not offering partnership, but control. It was convenient for the world to keep India in that role. It was easier that way. A follower is predictable, a follower is manageable, a follower does not question, but that time is over. When the decision was made, it was like the breaking of chains. The chains of dependency, the chains of obedience, the chains of silence. India looked at the world and said, "We are not followers, we are leaders, we will not be told who we are, we will decide that ourselves." That was the moment of transformation, that was the ignition point where history shifted gears, and the world realized that the old game was finished. You see, leadership is not about waiting for permission. Leadership is not about waiting for approval. Leadership is about stepping forward when everyone else hesitates. It is about saying no when everyone else says yes out of fear. And that is what India did. It made a choice that shook the entire system. The United States, used to countries falling in line, was stunned. The rest of the world, used to India taking the back seat, was shocked. But for the people of India, it was a roar that had been waiting to erupt for generations. This decision was not born in comfort. It was not born in a room full of smiling diplomats. It was born out of frustration, out of pride, out of the refusal to be used any longer. The United States had expected compliance. They thought that India would continue to play the part of the reliable junior partner, always nodding, always obeying, always ready to fight someone else's battles but never allowed to win its own. But India had different plans. It was done being underestimated. It was done being managed. It was done being told what it could and could not do. The shift was like the turning of a tide. You could feel it in the way leaders spoke, in the way policies were announced, in the way the world reacted. Suddenly, the narrative was not about India as an assistant, but about India as a challenger, as a rival, as a power in its own right. And the more the United States tried to push back with threats, with sanctions, with warnings, the stronger India became. Because leadership is not forged in comfort, it is forged in fire, and India was ready to walk through that fire to claim its destiny. Think about it. For decades, the U.S. held the upper hand in trade, in technology, in defense cooperation. They expected India to be grateful for every scrap of support, every deal, every handshake. But then came the moment when India said, "We do not need scraps. We do not need permission. We will create our own path." That decision was like an explosion. It destroyed the illusion of equality and revealed the truth. The United States wanted obedience, but India wanted respect. Respect is not given to followers. Respect is earned by leaders, and that day, India earned it. The world stage is not a fair place. It is full of wolves. It is full of predators. If you are weak, you are eaten. If you are submissive, you are controlled. But if you show your teeth, if you show your strength, if you show that you will not bend, then suddenly the predators think twice. That is what leadership does. It commands attention. It demands respect. It changes the balance of fear. And that is what India achieved with that single decision. Now I want you to imagine the ripple effect. One choice did not just change a bilateral relationship, it changed alliances, it changed trade flows, it changed military strategies. Countries that once saw India as a secondary player now had to recalculate. They had to ask themselves, what happens when India refuses to play along? What happens when India starts leading instead of following? And the answer was clear. The entire global order begins to shift. This is what true transformation looks like. It is not gradual, it is not polite, it is not a negotiation. It is sudden, it is disruptive, and it is irreversible. Once a nation decides to stop being a follower, it can never go back. Once a nation claims leadership, it will fight to hold it, no matter the cost, and that is exactly where India stands today. The cost is high. Leadership always comes with a price. You lose old friends who were never really friends. You face enemies who feel threatened by your rise. You face sanctions, tariffs, propaganda, pressure. But let me tell you something, all of that is worth it, because what you gain is priceless. You gain sovereignty. You gain dignity. You gain the right to write your own story, and no amount of punishment can take that away. The people of India felt this shift in their hearts. For years, they had watched their country treated as less than what it truly was. For years, they had watched leaders smile for cameras while knowing the deals were unequal, the promises empty. But when the decision came, when the transformation began, they felt pride, they felt strength. They felt that finally, India was not just rising in numbers, in population, in economy, but rising in spirit, in courage, in global respect. That pride is the fuel that powers nations. That pride is what makes people sacrifice, what makes them work harder, what makes them fight for their country. And make no mistake, the world noticed, rivals noticed, allies noticed, and the United States noticed most of all. Because when a follower turns into a leader, the old leader feels threatened. The balance shifts. The rules change. The entire chessboard must be rearranged. That is why there was so much outrage, so much pushback, so many attempts to punish India for daring to step out of line. But punishment only made India stronger. Resistance only hardened its resolve, challenges only sharpened its focus, because once you taste leadership, you can never go back to being a follower. This is not just about geopolitics, this is about psychology. It is about confidence, it is about identity. For decades, India was told it was not ready, not strong enough, not capable of leading on the world stage, and for decades many believed it. But then came the moment of awakening, the moment of decision, and suddenly the lie was exposed. India was not weak. India was not incapable. India was not destined to be a follower. India was ready. India was strong. India was destined to lead, and the beauty of this transformation is that it inspires others. Other nations that have been pushed around, silenced, told to obey, are now watching and saying, if India can stand up, why can't we? If India can lead, why can't we? That is the true power of leadership. It is not just about what you gain, but about what you inspire. It is about setting an example, about showing the world that the old order can be challenged, that giants can rise, that lions can roar again. A single decision did this, not an army, not a war, not a revolution, just one decision. That is the power of choice, that is the power of courage, that is the power of leadership. When you decide to stop being a follower, the entire universe rearranges itself around you. That is what India proved. That is why this moment will be remembered in history. That is why no matter what happens next, the transformation cannot be undone.